she came to the wedding alone, surrounded by couples in joy, feeling invisible in the crowd. But then he appeared. A stranger, an Apache, who would change her night forever. Clara had never been one for big celebrations. Weddings, in particular, made her feel acutely aware of her solitude. Tonight was no different. She had been invited to a grand wedding at the historic Hawthorne Manor, a sprawling estate with sparkling chandeliers, polished marble floors, and ornate floral arrangements that seemed to reach the ceiling. The scent of fresh roses and jasmine mingled with the subtle fragrance of expensive perfumes worn by the guests, creating a dizzying, almost intoxicating atmosphere. She had arrived early, hoping to catch a quiet moment before the party began in earnest. But it quickly became clear that quiet was a luxury she would not have tonight. Laughter echoed through the grand hall, the sound of champagne glasses clinking punctuated by bursts of lively conversation. Couples moved fluidly across the dance floor, their bodies synchronized as if to an invisible rhythm only they could hear. Every time Clara's gaze wandered to the dance floor, she felt a twinge of envy, a reminder of the emptiness that clung to her even in a room full of joy. Clara had dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing a deep emerald gown that complemented her eyes and flowed gracefully around her as she moved. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was understated but elegant. She had hoped that the effort would make her feel confident, but standing at the edge of the room, she felt like an observer of a world she could not fully enter. The laughter, the smiles, the subtle glances exchanged between partners, it was all a language she no longer spoke. She retreated to a corner, near the grand staircase, a spot where the crowd thinned just enough to let her breathe. From here, she could see the entire room, the string quartet in the corner, the flower-laden tables, and the sparkling candelabras that reflected the soft, golden light onto the polished marble. Clara watched the guests with a detached fascination. Some were old friends, their faces familiar and welcoming, while others were strangers who seemed to glide effortlessly into conversations, their smiles perfectly timed and laughter never forced. She envied them, envied their ease, their sense of belonging. Clara's thoughts wandered to the person she had almost asked to come with her. A friend, a date, anyone who could have shared this evening with her. But plans had fallen through, and she had decided not to cancel. Perhaps there was something brave about showing up alone, she thought, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Each glance at the couples around her reminded her of what she didn't have. Someone to hold her hand, someone to share the warmth of this night. Despite the quiet melancholy, Clara tried to immerse herself in the atmosphere. She sipped her champagne slowly, savoring its delicate effervescence, and allowed herself to appreciate the small details, the intricate patterns on the wedding cake, the subtle shimmer of silk dresses, the gentle sway of the chandelier crystals catching the light. There was beauty here, undeniable beauty, even if it felt slightly out of reach. And then she noticed him. Across the room, standing just outside the flow of dancing couples, was a figure who seemed to command attention without trying. Tall, confident, and strikingly composed, he moved through the crowd with a presence that made her look twice. There was something in the way he surveyed the room, an air of quiet authority, yet his gaze softened as it landed on her. Clara felt a jolt of curiosity, a sensation that had been absent from her evening so far. She couldn't take her eyes off him. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, her evening would not be spent entirely in solitude. Maybe there was a story waiting to unfold, hidden somewhere among the laughter, the lights, and the strangers in this grand hall. As she adjusted her posture and tried to compose herself, she didn't yet know what was coming, but she felt deep down that this night might turn into something unforgettable. The wedding, which had seemed like a monument to her loneliness, now held a subtle promise. and all it took was one pair of eyes to ignite a thought as Clara sat quietly at the edge of the dance floor. Nursing her glass of champagne, she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The bustling laughter of the wedding seemed to fade slightly, and her attention was drawn toward a figure moving deliberately through the crowd. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a trick of the lighting or a shadow cast by one of the tall candelabras. But no, this was real. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to part the throng of dancers effortlessly. His presence didn't demand attention in a loud or aggressive way. Instead, it commanded it. There was something in the way he carried himself, a calm authority paired with an almost magnetic stillness that made people instinctively notice him. He was an Apache man, distinguished not just by features or attire, but by the aura of someone who knew himself and his place in the world. Clara's curiosity sharpened. Her loneliness, which had been heavy and dull like a gray cloud over her evening, now felt charged with anticipation. She found herself watching him as he navigated the crowd with fluid grace, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto hers. And when they did, Clara felt the tiniest flicker of recognition, as if the universe had orchestrated this moment specifically for her. The man approached slowly, yet each step seemed purposeful. He didn't rush, didn't stumble over wedding guests or bump into waiters. There was a precision in his movement, a quiet command of the space around him that made the entire scene seem almost cinematic. Clara, for the first time that night, felt seen. It wasn't just that he looked at her, it was the way he looked, like he could see past the surface and understand the quiet ache of her solitude. Her pulse quickened. She had spent the evening hiding on the edge of this lively scene, feeling like a ghost amidst the joy. And yet, here was a stranger, bridging the gap between her loneliness and the warmth of human connection with nothing more than a glance. It was disarming. Clara's instincts screamed caution, but her heart urged her to stay, to see what would happen. He finally reached her side, stopping just close enough that she could see the fine details of his face. His dark hair fell naturally, framing sharp, noble features, and his eyes, deep, knowing, and unwavering, held her gaze. There was a quiet kindness in them, but also a hint of mischief, as if he carried stories untold, secrets of the world that he might share if she were willing to listen. For a moment, there was silence between them, a brief suspension of the wedding's chaotic symphony. The clinking glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, the distant strains of a violin, all of it faded into a muted background. It was just the two of them, a temporary island amid the celebration. Clara felt her breath catch, her heartbeat quicken. Something about him was magnetic, a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. Then, finally, he spoke not loudly, not with ceremony, but in a soft, measured tone that sent a shiver down her spine. "Pretend you're mine tonight," he said, and the words were both a challenge and an invitation. They carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. He didn't ask. He didn't insist. He simply offered, allowing her the freedom to accept or retreat. Clara's mind reeled. Who was this man? Why had he singled her out? And yet, beneath the questions, a small part of her, maybe the part that had longed for connection, for adventure, for something beyond the predictable, felt a spark of daring. For one night, she could step into this story he offered, a night where her loneliness might be replaced by something unexpectedly thrilling. The music swelled around them again, pulling her back into reality. Guests twirled in pairs, laughter ringing through the air, but Clara remained fixed in her spot. Her eyes never left his. There was an unspoken understanding, a mutual recognition of the transient nature of this encounter. She didn't know what lay ahead, and perhaps that was the point. As he waited, patient yet expectant, Clara realized that something fundamental had shifted. The wedding, which had felt isolating just moments ago, suddenly held a sense of possibility. Tonight was no longer about solitude. Tonight was about the unknown, about surrendering, even briefly, to the pull of fate. And as she reached out, her hand trembling slightly, she felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of connection, of a story beginning just for her. In that moment, the crowded hall, the music, the chandeliers, all of it faded into insignificance. It was just the two of them, a meeting that promised a night unlike any other. And Clara, with her heart fluttering and a quiet smile on her lips, chose to step forward into the unknown. Clara's hand trembled slightly as it hovered in the space between them. The room, which had moments ago been a blur of swirling lights, laughter, and music, seemed to narrow into a tunnel of focus. All she could see was him, his dark eyes, the subtle curve of his lips, the way his presence seemed to anchor the chaos around her. There was a magnetic pull in the air, a quiet insistence that tonight could be different. "You don't have to," he said softly, noticing her hesitation. His voice was low, calm, and oddly comforting, carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cool, glittering hall. "But if you want, just for tonight. Pretend you're mine." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She wasn't sure if it was the thrill of the unexpected, the allure of being seen, or the desperate longing to escape the invisible wall she'd built around herself. Whatever it was, something inside her shifted. She nodded slightly, a mix of curiosity and courage stirring within her. He smiled, not arrogantly, but with an understated confidence that made her pulse race. Without another word, he extended his hand fully, a gesture both commanding and tender. Clara placed her hand in his, feeling the surprising warmth and strength of his grip. The moment their hands touched, a spark seemed to leap between them, tiny but undeniable. And Clara realized that she had just stepped into a story she hadn't known, she was longing for. He led her to the center of the dance floor, and the orchestra's soft waltz enveloped them. The world seemed to melt away as they moved together, his hands guiding her with a gentle certainty that made every step feel effortless. Clara found herself laughing softly at the unexpected ease of it all, the sound of her own joy feeling foreign yet exhilarating. Their movements were synchronized in a way that felt almost instinctive. Every turn, every subtle dip, every sway of their bodies was a conversation without words, a language of trust and subtle intimacy. She could feel the warmth of his body against hers, hear the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat, and sense the unspoken understanding that this night was theirs. Fleeting and precious. As they danced, Clara's initial nervousness began to dissolve. She realized that the strangers around them, the laughing couples, the clinking glasses, the soft candlelight had become little more than a blurred backdrop. He was here, fully present, offering her a rare gift, the freedom to lose herself, even briefly, in connection. "You dance well," she murmured, partly to distract herself from the intensity of the moment, partly because she meant it. He chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. "It's easy when the partner trusts the music." "And me." There was a playful note in his tone, a teasing invitation that made her laugh again, lighter this time, more genuine. Clara's thoughts drifted to the loneliness she had carried into the wedding. How heavy it had felt, how visible she had been to herself in her isolation. And now she was laughing, moving, sharing a space with someone who didn't judge her, someone who simply noticed her and offered her the joy of a fleeting connection. She realized that this dance was more than just movement. It was a release, a reclamation of something she had almost forgotten she possessed, the ability to feel alive in someone else's presence. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them. The soft glow of chandeliers reflected in the polished floor, creating a shimmering halo around their bodies. She could see the faint sparkle in his eyes when he caught her gaze, the subtle, almost imperceptible smile that suggested he understood something unspoken about her. For a few magical minutes, The world outside the dance floor ceased to exist. It didn't matter that she had arrived alone, that the wedding was filled with laughter and love she had not yet shared. Here, in his arms, she felt seen, acknowledged, and curiously liberated. The music, the movement, and the closeness all combined into a delicate moment that she knew, in some way, she would carry with her forever. As the song reached its gentle conclusion, he guided her back to her seat with the same quiet grace. Her cheeks were flushed, her heartbeat still racing, and she felt a strange combination of exhilaration and melancholy. It was a reminder that this night, like all nights, was fleeting. Yet, even in its transience, it had imprinted something on her soul, a whisper of connection, a hint of possibility, and the unforgettable sensation of being wanted, even if only for a single dance. And as she sat down, still catching her breath, she realized that the mysterious stranger had given her more than a dance. He had given her the experience of being alive in the moment, a fleeting escape from the loneliness she had carried into the grand hall. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this night was only just beginning. After the dance ended, the music slowly faded into soft murmurs and laughter that filled the grand hall. Clara returned to her seat, her hands still tingling from the warmth of his touch, her cheeks flushed from both the movement and the sudden rush of exhilaration. But the feeling lingered far beyond the dance floor, the sense that something unexpected, almost magical, had begun. He followed her, not with urgency, but with a quiet patience that was almost hypnotic. When he arrived at her side, Clara felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. It was as though his presence created a small sanctuary within the grand chaos of the wedding. The ambient lights from chandeliers softened around him, highlighting the thoughtful intensity of his gaze. There was no pretense here, no superficial charm, just an unmistakable sincerity that made her feel both seen and understood. "Would you like some air?" he asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner near the garden doors. Clara nodded, barely trusting her voice not to betray the mix of curiosity and anticipation bubbling inside her. She followed him through the crowd, careful not to stumble over the polished marble floor, until they stepped out into the night air. The garden was lit by scattered lanterns, their glow reflected in the dewy petals of carefully arranged flowers. The scent of jasmine mingled with the soft evening breeze, and for a moment, the world seemed to contract until it was only the two of them. They settled on a low stone bench, the kind you might find in a centuries-old courtyard, surrounded by the whisper of leaves in the night wind. Clara felt the weight of her earlier isolation lift as she noticed the subtle attentiveness in his expression. He didn't interrupt, didn't force conversation, yet his presence demanded neither words nor pretense. There was a natural rhythm to his quiet companionship that encouraged her to open herself in ways she hadn't anticipated. They spoke softly, the voices of the distant wedding guests fading into the background. He asked about her life, her passions, her dreams, not with idle curiosity, but with a genuine desire to understand her. Clara found herself sharing stories she had rarely spoken aloud, pieces of herself that had long been tucked away, thinking they were insignificant or unworthy of attention. Yet here, with this stranger, they felt alive, valued. His questions were not invasive, but insightful, prompting reflection, laughter, and even gentle self-revelation. At one point, she laughed a clear, unrestrained sound that startled her with its authenticity. He smiled, and it was neither flattering nor patronizing, just an acknowledgement that her joy was present and unmissable. There was a delicate intimacy in the way he listened, the way his gaze never wavered, and the subtle nods that encouraged her to continue. It was in these quiet moments, away from the spectacle of the wedding, that the true connection between them began to crystallize. He shared fragments of his own story too, not burdensome or heavy, but illuminating. Tales of his travels, of fleeting encounters, and of the quiet wisdom that comes from truly observing the world. Each story revealed layers of depth and perspective that Clara hadn't expected, offering glimpses of the man behind the mysterious allure. She realized that he had an ability to make the ephemeral feel significant, to turn a passing moment into something lasting in memory and emotion. The garden seemed suspended in time. The lanterns cast a soft amber glow that danced across their features, creating an almost dreamlike tableau. Clara felt a strange combination of exhilaration and serenity, a sense that she was both discovering and being discovered, that her own story was intertwining with his in a delicate, temporary harmony. Words were no longer necessary for every understanding. Sometimes a shared glance, a soft smile, or a quiet pause conveyed more than sentences ever could dot as the night deepened. Clara realized that this connection, unexpected, fleeting, yet profoundly real, was transforming her. The loneliness she had felt at the wedding, the isolation that had clung to her like a second skin, was beginning to dissolve. In its place was a sense of being seen, of being acknowledged in a way she hadn't anticipated. The connection was subtle, almost intangible, yet undeniable, a meeting of minds and hearts that transcended the mere circumstance of a crowded ballroom. And in that moment, she understood something essential. Some encounters are fleeting, but they leave a mark that lingers far beyond the temporal. The dance had been magical, but it was this quiet communion, this shared presence beyond words, that would remain with her, etched into memory like the soft glow of lanterns in the night garden. She felt, for the first time in years, that she was not invisible, not here, not now, and perhaps not ever again. As they eventually rose to return to the wedding hall, Clara carried a renewed sense of purpose and curiosity. The night still held possibilities, and she sensed that her encounter with him was far from over. But for now, the connection forged in words, in shared stories, and in quiet understanding had already become an indelible part of her evening, a moment she would treasure, even if it existed only in the present. The night had deepened, and the wedding hall's once vibrant energy had softened into quiet conversations, lingering music, and the occasional laughter echoing from distant corners. Clara and the Apache man stood together near the garden, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns that painted the courtyard in golden amber. Every detail, the gentle rustling of leaves, the faint scent of roses, the distant hum of music felt magnified in the hush of this private moment. Clara's heart was a whirlwind of emotions. She had spent the evening enveloped in his presence, danced in his arms, and shared stories that had remained untold for years. Each interaction had drawn her deeper into a delicate web of connection, trust, and curiosity. And now, as the night edged toward its inevitable end, a subtle tension hung between them, one neither of them could fully ignore. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of warmth, understanding, and quiet melancholy. There was an almost imperceptible hesitation in his posture, as if he too were aware of the fleeting nature of what they shared. "Clara," he began softly, "tonight. It's meant to be temporary. One night. One moment. Nothing more." The words were gentle, not harsh, yet they carried the weight of reality, a reminder that this connection, however profound, could not extend beyond the confines of the evening. Clara's chest tightened, a pang of disappointment mingling with gratitude. She had felt seen, valued, and alive, but the truth remained that this night was borrowed from time itself, destined to slip through her fingers. Her gaze fell to the soft stone path beneath their feet. For a moment, neither spoke. The night air carried a quiet intimacy, filled with unspoken emotions, lingering glances, and the fragile beauty of impermanence. Clara realized that she had a choice: to cling to the fleeting warmth and hope for more, or to honor the moment as it was, savoring it for what it could be without demanding permanence. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light, and in that gaze she conveyed understanding, acceptance, and a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they shared. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle rustle of leaves. "Tonight, it's enough," he smiled, a small, bittersweet curve of his lips that carried both relief and longing. There was a softness in his expression, an unspoken gratitude for her willingness to embrace the moment without fear or expectation. He extended his hand, a silent invitation to walk with him one last time through the garden, to savor the final minutes before reality reclaimed its hold. They strolled slowly along the winding path, their steps measured, their hands brushing occasionally in gentle, fleeting contact. The night felt suspended, as though time itself had chosen to pause, granting them a final interlude in this delicate story. Every sound, the distant music, the whispering leaves, the subtle night breeze was heightened, lending the moment a cinematic quality that Clara would remember forever. As they reached the garden gate, the moment of parting arrived. He stopped, turning to face her fully. His eyes held a depth of emotion that words could not capture: regret, admiration, and the quiet recognition of a night that had been extraordinary precisely because it was transient. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and for a fleeting instant, she wished she could stretch time, bend reality, make this night linger indefinitely, but she knew it could not. Smiling softly through the bittersweet ache in her chest, she extended her hand, and he took it gently. They lingered in silence, their fingers brushing, eyes locked in mutual understanding. There was no need for promises, no expectation of future encounters, only the acknowledgement that what they shared was real, unforgettable, and perfect in its impermanence. Finally, he stepped back, releasing her hand with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Remember tonight," he said quietly, "not for what it was, but for what it made you feel." Clara nodded, a single tear glistening in her eye, and whispered, "I will." She turned and began to walk away, each step carrying the weight of both loss and wonder. Yet even as she left the garden behind, she felt a lightness within, a sense of having lived fully, if only for one night. The lanterns flickered behind her, casting long, warm shadows across the courtyard. She glanced back once, catching his silhouette framed against the gate, and offered a faint, lingering smile. Then she walked into the night, carrying with her the memory of a stranger who had shown her, even briefly, the extraordinary beauty of connection, courage, and the ephemeral magic of being truly seen. And though the wedding would continue without her, Clara knew that this night, this single extraordinary encounter, would remain etched into her heart forever, an unrepeatable moment, perfect in its fleeting nature. The wedding hall had long since begun to quiet down. Couples lingered on the dance floor for the last songs. Groups gathered around tables murmuring in soft conversation, and the string quartet's final notes hung in the air, delicate and fading. Clara walked through the hall, each step measured, each breath carrying the warmth of the evening she had just lived. The lingering scent of roses, the soft hum of laughter, and the shimmer of chandelier lights seemed to follow her, wrapping her in the memory of the night. Her mind kept returning to him, the Apache stranger whose presence had so completely shifted the trajectory of her evening. He had been confident yet gentle, magnetic yet unobtrusive, and above all profoundly perceptive. In his company, she had felt something she hadn't felt in years, fully seen. Every subtle glance, every quiet word exchanged in the garden or on the dance floor had left its mark, a memory she could revisit endlessly. Clara paused near the grand exit, gazing out through the garden doors at the soft glow of lanterns lining the stone paths. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of jasmine and the quiet whispers of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. The garden had been their sanctuary, a place apart from the chaos of the wedding, where the outside world didn't exist and they could simply be. She remembered the intimate conversations they had shared there, the laughter that had come so effortlessly, the stories they had told, revealing pieces of themselves normally kept hidden. It struck her then with both clarity and a pang of longing that this encounter was fleeting. He had reminded her gently that tonight was temporary, that their time together had been meant for this single night, this one chapter. And yet, in the impermanence lay the beauty of it. Clara realized that some experiences aren't meant to last forever. Their purpose is to ignite something in us, to remind us of our own capacity for connection, joy, and courage. This night, brief though it was, had awakened something within her, a spark she had thought long extinguished died as she reflected. Her eyes instinctively drifted back to the garden gate, half expecting to see him silhouetted in the lantern light. But he was gone, leaving only the faint echo of his presence behind. A bittersweet smile curved her lips. There was sorrow in the goodbye, yes, but also gratitude. Gratitude for the moments shared, for the laughter, for the dance, and for the quiet understanding that had passed between them without the need for promises or guarantees. She thought about the phrase he had whispered to her earlier, words that had seemed simple at first but now resonated deeply. Pretend you're mine tonight. It had been an invitation, a challenge, a chance to step beyond the ordinary into something extraordinary. And in accepting it, she had allowed herself to fully inhabit the present moment, to let go of worry, hesitation, and self-consciousness. She had danced, laughed, and shared herself openly, experiencing a freedom she had not known she was missing. Clara's heart swelled with the understanding that life itself is a series of fleeting moments, some mundane, some extraordinary, and that the beauty lies in embracing them fully. The night had shown her that connection doesn't always need permanence to be meaningful. Sometimes the impact of a single night, a single encounter, can echo within us for years, shaping our understanding of ourselves and others in ways we could never anticipate. Turning away from the garden, Clara walked toward the grand exit of the manor, each step lightened by a sense of fulfillment and quiet joy. The music, the laughter, the fleeting intimacy of the evening, they were hers now, a private treasure she could carry with her wherever she went. Even the loneliness she had arrived with had been transformed. It was no longer an emptiness, but a reminder of her own resilience, her capacity to embrace the unexpected, and her ability to connect deeply when the moment demanded it. As she stepped into the night, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, Clara felt an unshakable sense of possibility. The stranger was gone, the wedding continuing without her, but the memory of this night, the dance, the conversations, the quiet, luminous connection would remain with her. And in that memory was a subtle but powerful truth. Life is richer when we allow ourselves to truly be seen, even if only for one night. The morning light was soft, filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the room in warm, golden tones. Clara woke with the lingering memory of the previous night pressing gently against her consciousness. She could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers, the thrill of the dance, and the quiet intimacy of their conversations under the lantern-lit garden. It was as if the echoes of the night had followed her into the new day, settling in her mind like a delicate, treasured melody. She sat on the edge of her bed, tracing the contours of her memory, reliving each moment in vivid detail. The wedding hall, once a place of isolation, had transformed into a stage for possibility and wonder. The strangers around her, the laughter, the music, they had all become part of a story that had belonged exclusively to her. In the midst of celebration and chaos, she had found a quiet truth. Meaningful connection doesn't require permanence. Sometimes it arrives just long enough to illuminate our hearts, then leaves us with the gift of memory. Clara thought about the Apache stranger, the man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed the texture of her evening. His calm confidence, his attentive listening, and the subtle understanding in his gaze had made her feel seen in a way few people ever had. It wasn't about romance or obligation, it was about recognition, about sharing space with someone who truly noticed her, who made her feel alive in the present moment. She realized that such encounters, rare as they are life's way of reminding us of our capacity for empathy, courage, and joy. A soft smile curved her lips as she recalled their parting in the garden. The bittersweet goodbye had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. He hadn't clung, he hadn't asked for promises, he had simply allowed the night to exist in its perfect impermanence. And in that, Clara had learned something vital. Sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones we cannot hold on to. The beauty of life is found not in possession, but in appreciation, and she intended to carry this lesson forward. She dressed slowly, moving through her morning routine with a quiet reverence. Each motion, from brushing her hair to pouring a cup of tea, seemed infused with a sense of possibility. The world outside her window looked ordinary, the same streets, the same sunlight, the same rhythm of life, but inside her, something fundamental had shifted. She walked through her day with a newfound awareness, noticing details she might have previously overlooked. The subtle kindness of a neighbor's smile, the playful flutter of leaves in the wind, the soft hum of music from a passing car. Clara's mind wandered back to the phrase he had whispered, "Pretend you're mine tonight." Initially, it had seemed simple, even audacious, but now it felt profound. It wasn't a command or a claim, it was an invitation to fully inhabit the present, to embrace spontaneity and courage, to open her heart to connection even when the future remained uncertain. That single night had shown her how fleeting moments can be transformative if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, attentive, and receptive. She realized, too, that the night had given her confidence. Confidence not in external validation, but in her own ability to engage with life fully, without hesitation. She had taken a risk by stepping out of her comfort zone, by accepting an unexpected offer, by trusting a stranger, and the reward had been immeasurable. That courage would now extend beyond the memory of the wedding, it would ripple into her daily interactions, her choices, her openness to new experiences. Clara left her apartment and walked into the city, breathing in the crisp morning air. The streets were alive with ordinary bustle, yet she saw them with fresh eyes. Everything seemed richer, more vibrant, the chatter of people, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the golden light reflecting off the windows of buildings. She carried the memory of the night like a secret talisman, a reminder that magic exists in the fleeting, in the unexpected, and in the quiet recognition between two souls. And though she knew she might never see him again, she understood that she didn't need to. The impact of their encounter would remain with her forever, shaping her perspective, her emotions, and her capacity for connection. The Apache stranger had shown her that a single night could be enough to alter the course of her inner life, to awaken her heart, illuminate her mind, and leave her brimming with hope. As Clara continued walking, a lightness accompanied her steps, a sense of freedom and possibility. Life, she realized, was full of fleeting, beautiful moments, and she now possessed the clarity to embrace them fully. She smiled to herself, knowing that the memory of the wedding, the dance, and the stranger who had whispered words that would stay with her forever had transformed her in ways she would carry for a lifetime. And so, she moved forward, not alone, not lonely, but alive, aware, and ready to welcome whatever moments of magic life had yet to offer. The days after the wedding unfolded quietly, each one blending into the next, yet Clara carried with her the undeniable imprint of that night. At first, she replayed the memories constantly, the glint of the chandeliers above the dance floor, the warmth of his hand guiding hers, the intensity of his eyes as he whispered those unforgettable words, "Pretend you're mine tonight." It was strange, she thought, how a single evening could change the rhythm of an entire life. Nothing around her had shifted, the streets were the same, her routines unaltered, but she herself was not the same woman who had walked into that wedding alone. Something within her had been awakened, something she could not ignore. Clara began to notice how her days felt fuller now, even in solitude. The silence of her apartment no longer weighed on her as heavily as it once had. Instead, it felt like an invitation space to breathe, to create, to remember. She moved with greater ease, no longer shrinking into the background, but allowing herself to take up space in her own life. The night had taught her not to wait passively for joy to find her, but to embrace it when it arrived, even if only fleetingly. And more than that, it had reminded her of her own courage. She had once thought of herself as hesitant, cautious, too careful to risk embarrassment or disappointment. Yet she had said yes to a stranger. She had stepped onto the dance floor. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to open her heart without guarantees. That bravery had unlocked a new truth. Clara was capable of more than she believed. On one quiet evening, about a week after the wedding, she sat at her desk with a notebook before her. She had the sudden urge to capture it all, not just the events of that night, but the emotions, the lessons, the way it had carved a permanent place within her. Her pen moved across the page, spilling fragments of memory and feeling, the sound of his voice, the stillness of the garden, the way time seemed to bend around us. The sweetness of goodbye. As she wrote, she realized she wasn't clinging to the memory in desperation. Instead, she was honoring it. The night had been a gift, one she didn't need to hold on to forever, but one she would cherish always. Writing about it was her way of preserving the essence without trapping herself in longing. Clara leaned back in her chair, closing the notebook gently, and whispered aloud to the empty room, "Thank you." It wasn't a thank you to any one person, but to life itself for reminding her that beauty can appear when least expected, and that sometimes the most fleeting encounters are the ones that linger the longest. She thought, too, about him, the Apache stranger who had carried himself with quiet confidence and had given her the courage to step outside of herself. Perhaps he had moved on to another city, another story, another fleeting moment with someone else. Or perhaps she had been the only one. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had walked into her life exactly when she needed him most and walked out just as gracefully, leaving her not emptier, but fuller. Weeks later, when she returned to another gathering, this time with friends, Clara noticed something had changed in her presence. She no longer lingered on the edges, invisible and guarded. Instead, she laughed freely, spoke openly, and met the eyes of strangers without fear. She wasn't waiting to be noticed anymore. She was alive in her own right, radiant with the quiet confidence she had carried out of that unforgettable night. And though she would never again hear those exact words whispered in her ear, she carried them with her, always a mantra of sorts. Pretend you're mine tonight, to her now. It meant more than belonging to someone else. It meant belonging to the moment, to herself, to life. It meant stepping into each day with openness, courage, and the willingness to be seen. Standing at her window one evening, Clara looked out at the stars scattered across the sky, their brilliance as fleeting as it was eternal. She smiled softly, the memory of the wedding and the stranger resting gently in her heart, for she knew now that life's most precious gifts often come in brief, dazzling flashes gone before we can grasp them, but lasting within us forever. And with that truth guiding her, Clara turned away from the window, ready to face whatever moments, whatever dances, whatever fleeting magic tomorrow might bring, because she understood now one night could change everything.